Welcome. I'm Dr. Owen Anderson, and I'm going to begin a series on the moral law. This is an important part of the study of ethics. Ethics studies choices, especially asks this question, what ought I to do? And the way to answer that question is by knowing what is good. You ought to do what is good. So in order to study ethics, we're studying this question, what is good? And so then we get into the moral law. The moral law describes what things you must do in order to achieve the good. What choices do you need to make in order to achieve the good? Now, to use the word law in ethics sometimes can be confusing because people might say, laws, that makes me think of gravity, right? And gravity is when I drop something, it falls every time. Whereas in morality and ethics, people don't always follow the laws. They break the laws sometimes. Well, here's where it's law-like. When you want the good, you must do this. We'll look at the moral law. And if you don't do this, you don't get the good. So although you can break the moral law, you can't break the moral law and still get the good. So the moral law guides us to, leads us to what is good, of highest value. What we're going to do in this video is look at some of the main properties of the moral law. Specifically, the moral law is clear, first one. That's because the moral law is based on human nature and it's clear what it is to be a human. Human nature is what distinguishes humans from non-humans. And therefore, the moral law is easily knowable or readily knowable because it's easy to know what a human is. And so the moral law is clear. If we don't know the moral law, we can't blame the moral law. We can't say, well, it's so difficult to know the moral law. I just couldn't figure it out. No, it's clear what the moral law is. So if I'm not keeping it, that's on me. It's culpable ignorance. I don't know what I should know. So the moral law is clear. Next, the moral law is for everyone. The moral law applies to all humans at all times. It's based on human nature. So it applies to everyone at all times. Third, the moral law is teleological. And what that means, it's goal-oriented. Specifically the good. The moral law is focused on the good. And if you don't know what the good is, you won't be able to know what the moral law is. So that's why that's going to be one of the very first things we look at. The first moral law gets right into what is good. And the moral law is aimed at that. How do I achieve what is good? What is of lasting value? What is sought for its own sake and not for something else? The good. Fourth, the moral law is comprehensive. That is, it applies to all human choices. It's based on human nature and applies to all human choices. So there's no field, no area of human life where the moral law doesn't apply. Someone might say, well, business is business. Morality is one thing, but business is something else. No, it applies to human choice in business. Or politics. Politics is notoriously messy. And someone might say, that's not morality, that's politics. But the moral law applies to politics also. Any field, any area where humans are making choices, they're choosing what they think is good. And so the good applies. It's comprehensive and applying to all of those areas. Fifth, it's the source of unity between people. And you might think that way, especially about ethics. You might say, ethics is where people choose things, and this is a matter of taste. And in matters of taste, there's no dispute. You can't argue with people about their matters of taste. Well, we're taking it out of that realm of taste by saying it's not a matter of taste, it's a matter of the good. The good is based on human nature. Both of those are objective. And so when we make a choice, you might think about that in ethics. One person values this thing and someone else values another thing. And so they make choices that are divergent and they clash and they have disagreements. And when we study human history, that's really what we study is all of these disagreements that have occurred throughout human history. So how do we have unity? Well, that's what the moral law provides. By knowing what is good, we're able to overcome divisions. And that's divisions between humans at the large scale, between groups of humans, between people at a smaller scale. Think about relationships that break down because they don't have a common view about what is good. Or within a person. Interestingly, people can be divided against themselves, can't they? Both at one moment, you might both want something, but also think it's not good for you and you don't know what to do. Or over time, you can think about how your past self might have done things which now handicap your present self. Or your present self chooses things that are different than what you might think of your future self. So whether it's over time or at a specific time when someone's divided with themselves, the moral law provides a basis for unity between persons. And then the moral law is what all persons can know at all times. It's from, we could say, general revelation. This is 6. The moral law is from general revelation. It's what all persons can know. There is a moral law, the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments in Scripture that you might be familiar with. But the Scripture is not available to all persons. I mean, today you might think, well, almost anybody can get a hold of a Bible or look up it on the internet or something. But in the history of the world, the way humans knew the moral law was from general revelation, by knowing the nature of things. And we want to look and see how that might overlap with the Decalogue, with the 10 Commandments. But this is a law, it's put this way, this 6th point. The law is written on their hearts. Now that doesn't mean that inside your heart you like open it up and there's a tattoo on your heart muscle. No, of course not. The heart there means the nature of things. The law is written on human nature. It's according to human nature to live this way. When we act contrary to the moral law, we're acting contrary to human nature. So it's knowable from general revelation. And then 7, it's critical. The moral law is critical. It's a matter of life and death. And when I put it that way, you might initially just think of physical life and death. And then it's more the area of medicine and health. And you say, what do you mean morality is a matter of life and death? I guess it does give some prudential rules so that you don't, maybe get hurt on accident. But you don't really normally think about morality as a matter of life and death physically. And although that does come up sometimes, that's right. I don't mean just physically. Matter of the good life or not the good life. Someone who follows the moral law is leading the good life. Someone who doesn't follow the moral law isn't leading the good life. Which is like death. You're not living according to human nature. You're living as something other than human or less than human. So the moral law is critical. If you don't know the moral law, then you won't be able to lead the good life. And that's the debate. How do I know I've led the good life? Many people wonder that. Well, that's what the moral law is about. So these 7 points, going through them in order to think about what is the moral law as we now get into specific laws. I'm going to have videos about specific laws and see how are they a guide to achieving the good. And so that'll be what the first one needs to look at. What is the good? What is the highest end, that at which all things aim for humans? The good according to human nature. In order to answer that, we'll have to know what is it to be a human. So the very first moral law will get us into that. What is good? What is human? What is the origin of human nature? So the moral law and all of the ways in which it applies to human nature. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you next time.